afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Boise Metro Chamber Legislative Update. I'm Lindsay Moser and your host for today's event. The Boise Metro Chamber is Idaho's only 5-star accredited chamber and represents more than 1,700 businesses. We are only able to provide current events and educational content because of our members and their investment in our community. Today's event is sponsored by Idaho Ed News, Idaho Statesman, and the Idaho Press. Our media partners are key to the success because they enable us to reach farther into the community and educate more people. For today's legislative update, we are joined by two members of the Senate leadership. First, I would like to welcome Senate Majority Leader Kelly Anthon from District 27. Senator Anthon was appointed in 2015 to fill the District 27 vacancy and won his election in 2016, 2018, and 2020. A seventh-generation Idahoan, Anthon attended University of Idaho's College of Law and is a practicing attorney. He sits on the Judiciary and Rules Committee as well as the State Affairs. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me.
And next, I'd also like to welcome Senate Assistant Minority Leader Grant Burgoyne. Senator Burgoyne is originally from Alaska and attended the University of Idaho for undergrad and University of Kansas for law school. He is serving his 4th term in the Senate. Prior to that, he served in the House and has been a practicing attorney, mediator, arbitrator, managing partner, and adjunct professor. The senator sits on the Commerce and Human Resources Committee, Judiciary and Rules Committee, and Local Government and Taxation Committee. Senators, to both of you, welcome. Thanks for dealing with a few of our technical difficulties, and I appreciate both of you being here and willing to work with us.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's a pleasure to be here.
So first, before we kind of get started, I just wanted to do a quick check-in with each of you, just kind of how the session has been going so far this year, how it's been a little bit different, and just in general, how you've been dealing with COVID-19. So Senator Anthon, why don't we have you go first?
Well, sure. I guess it goes without saying that the COVID-19 outbreak has been something of a difference here at the State House, if for no other reason than the fact that we just don't see as many people here. And so that has been somewhat unusual as we've worked through the process. The great thing about it, however, is we have been able to transition into some virtual testimony to allow folks from all over the state to participate in the process without having to come to the Capitol. And there are still bugs to be worked out in that, but I think that's been a good thing and a good development for the state of Idaho. And of course, there are policy pieces and appropriations pieces that are dealing specifically with COVID-19 and will yet deal with COVID-19. And so that's some of the difference I'm seeing initially in the session.
Senator Burgoyne, your turn.
Well, as far as it being different, there's no question of that. The pandemic's had a real impact on us. Even though we are here in the Capitol building, we're doing things differently. Some of us are wearing masks pretty regularly. A lot of the public is staying away from the building and doing things remotely, as the senator has said. My sense of the pace of legislation is that it feels a little slower. I'm not sure if the statistics will bear that out. I do think that we're having a few difficulties, maybe getting some of the legislation relating to the pandemic going. And that may be making us feel like we're not quite making the progress that we want to make. And we've taken on some kind of tough issues. I know that Senator Anthon and I have both been involved in 2 constitutional amendments, and having one in a session is somewhat unusual. So things are different, no question about that.
And we'll get to your point about the constitutional amendments a little bit later, but first up with Senator Anthon, my question will be geared towards you. There have been a lot of new tax bills that have been introduced over the last 2 weeks, specifically the most prominent one, which would lower the income tax to 6.5% and the sales tax to 5.3%. But it would eliminate the grocery tax credit, ultimately impacting families across the state. Where is the Senate leadership on this issue, and what do you foresee happening on the tax front?
Well, thanks, Lindsay. And again, I wanted to say thanks to the Boise Metro. And just before I answer the question, just to say generally to the Boise Metro, thank you, because I know that the 2 senators that are before you care quite a bit about the economy and economic development and the vitality of the Idaho economy. And I know that you guys play such an important role in that. Also want to just in advance thank the good senator beside me, Senator Burgoyne. He and I have become sidekicks of sorts. The two of us teach law school together. We find ourselves in these kinds of forums often, even with the Idaho State Bar, and so it's a pleasure to be with him. Taxes. So I believe that what you're referring to is House Bill 199, which is a bill which I would tell you I don't believe is going to go anywhere. And I say that because I think the analysis of that particular bill shows that it is not necessarily a net tax decrease for many Idahoans, and it certainly isn't the case when you evaluate it in the context of its comparison to the grocery tax, getting rid of the grocery tax. So that having been said, if you want to know where Senate leadership kind of is on, majority leadership, I should say, on taxes, it is that there is a belief that we do need some tax reduction. The most recent talks, even as of this morning, are centered around income tax reductions with the use of the Wayfair tax reduction account in Idaho to not only fund some tax cuts, whether it be sales tax or income tax or a combination thereof, but also to provide some major funding and bonding authority in terms of transportation. And so I think this is what we would call a going home issue. We will not see the legislature, I think, go home without a tax reduction. Now, Senator Burgoyne and I have actually worked quite a bit on property tax over the years and tried to find solutions as best we can on a bipartisan level. Last year, we both championed changes to the circuit breaker. And I still favor that. We got it out of the Senate with, I think, only one no vote, and it just didn't quite get its way through the House. So I'm still hopeful we could see some meaningful property tax change as well. But that's where I think we're at this point.
Great, thanks. Senator Burgoyne, we'll turn it over to you. Having served both in the House and the Senate, you have been intimately involved in the property tax issues, as we were just kind of discussing, in your career. That said, residential property taxes continue to go up in the Valley dramatically. Senate Bill 1108 is supposed to address that, but the city of Nampa is moving to freeze all development due to the implications of that bill. Can you explain what Senate Bill 1108 is and its implications?
Well, Senate Bill 1108, in my estimation, will reduce the amount of money that local governments have to address the problems of growth and to address ongoing problems in general, like public safety and the services that people in communities have come to expect. Now, it's true that property taxes are driven to some degree by growth in local budgets, but local budgets are not funded 100% with the property tax. State money raised at the state level does go into local budgets. There's a revenue sharing process, and so it's going to have a less of an effect than one might think. The other thing about Senate Bill 1108 is it does not actually cut property taxes. In other words, it doesn't go into the property tax code and say they are reduced. It's a kind of an indirect attempt to cut. And there were a number of us who approached the interim property tax committee with the view that we should actually cut property taxes. Part of that is taking the homeowners exemption and making it a more valuable benefit for residential property tax payers. Another aspect of that is circuit breaker, as Senator Anthon was mentioning. And I came in with a goal, and a lot of my goals, because I'm in the minority party, aren't achieved. But my goal was I felt that we would be able to afford to cut the aggregate property tax burden in Idaho by 50%, or approximately $1 billion. And I do think that there are practical ways that we can make that happen. And that would have a real dramatic effect for every taxpayer. One of the issues that I see with Senate Bill 1108 is, as a resident of the Treasure Valley, you may see your property tax go down a little bit because of 1108. You might see it stay the same, or you might see it go up because of the vagaries of the property tax. If your property is appreciating at a higher rate than your neighbors, you could see your property tax go up. The other approaches that I've talked about are ways that you would actually see everybody getting a property tax cut. And I think that is a better way to go at the property tax issue and problem.
Great, thanks, Senator. Turning back to Senator Anthon here. There is a bill to eliminate the personal property taxes over the next 10 years. This would immediately impact the transient personal property, like huge tractors and other movable machinery. This is an odd tax, and it really makes bookkeeping difficult. What are your thoughts on completely eliminating the personal property tax, beginning with these big machines?
Well, thanks again. I think you're right that these are kind of odd taxes. And to be honest with you, there's never been a tax I haven't thought maybe we ought to cut it. There is something very interesting about the personal property tax that I think those of us who are interested in business expansion, in economic development success ought to be thinking about. And that is that when you eliminate the personal property tax, it's going to have a very direct and powerful impact on our ability to use the urban renewal tools in the state of Idaho. And in particular, it would also have a very big impact on urban renewal projects and financing already in place. So you will find that those cities that have been very smart and progressive to use urban renewal responsibly to expand the economy in their areas have used the tax increments, including tax increments off of personal property, to finance debt. And so if suddenly the personal property tax went away, you could have default on loans throughout the state in what are otherwise very successful urban renewal projects. So I know that the Boise Metro Chamber has stood beside me on issues like the use of urban renewal. And I think that your members should be interested to know that even though we do have some problems with personal property tax, it's a weird tax in many ways. It's odd, as you've said. We should be very careful to make sure that we don't undermine some of the tools that we use, especially in rural areas, to get economic development work done.
That kind of leads me to my next question with Senator Burgoyne. The homeowners exemption has its supporters and detractors. One detraction is the fact that many of our cities are essentially bedroom communities and residential properties exceeding 85% of the city and commercial being 15% or less. Increasing the exemption creates a huge shift to the very few commercial properties in places like Kuna, Star, and Eagle. What's the solution for this challenge?
Well, in its simplest terms, the solution is to have for local governments to have the ability to adjust the homeowners exemption to fit the needs of their community. There are some constitutional issues with that, some practical problems with that, and I'm sure some political opposition to that. But the problem with the property tax is that local communities are so different across the state. We right now today in our neck of the woods are experiencing an incredible growth, not only in residential market values, but in residential property taxes. There are other parts of the state that aren't seeing that. And so coming up with an amendment to state property tax law that works in all counties, in all cities, is very difficult. And it points up the problem, I think, of the property tax, which is that it's an outdated tax. You know, property tax came into being really in the feudal era, when property was the prime driver of economic prosperity and wealth. And the world has changed. The world began changing in the 1700s, and then in the 1800s more, and in the 20th century even more than that. And now property really is not a good measure of a person's wealth, and not a good basis for taxation. And it's clunky, and it doesn't work. And just to demonstrate that, I'm going to throw in on the previous question just a little bit and say I've long been a proponent of getting rid of personal property taxes. But I don't think now is a very good time to do it. Among the reasons is we haven't worked out the issues that Senator Anthon talked about. But our focus right now should be on how we can get the general property tax burden in this state down.
Seems to be a reoccurring issue that everybody is on top of mind as our property taxes continue to increase. Senator Anthon, back to you. The governor's emergency powers has been the focus of this year's legislature. During the height of the pandemic, our hospitals were overwhelmed and having to send certain patients elsewhere due to capacity issues. There's a House bill that defines the extent of an emergency by the percentage of those dying. 1.5% would only be a moderate emergency. Does this make sense? Shouldn't we be defining emergencies by our medical professionals' abilities to handle the contagion and all other emergencies that might arise simultaneously?
Well, thanks, Lindsay. I mean, I think one truth is, depending on where anybody falls on policy, the agreement has to be that we've just gone through something that's rare, it's unique in Idaho history, and we're learning from it. And one of the things that we should be learning from that episode is the exact issue that you're bringing up, which is, when is it appropriate to trigger emergency power responses, and to what extent should those powers be granted? What is the scope of those powers? How much time should they be given, and so on and so forth? And so you're seeing the legislature struggle with that. And it's not just a struggle, by the way, between House minority and House majority, or Senate majority and Senate minority. It's not a party by party. It's inside my caucus, a struggle with what that really is. Now, the bill I think you're talking about is House Bill 202. And I haven't spent a lot of time with that bill, but what I understand is that the definitions that are being used are actually the definitions the state of Idaho has used for a number of years in the emergency operation plans of the state of Idaho. So these aren't new arbitrary numbers. They're in fact the numbers that came from the experts in the first place. So if the question is, should we be relying on medical professionals and pathologists and epidemiologists and all that to make these standards, I'd say yes, absolutely. Perhaps the standards that we already had in the operation plan for the state of Idaho are not the correct, but that's what you're seeing in the legislation. You're seeing the most recent data, the most recent definitions of what an epidemic and so forth are. So again, I don't mean to question it, because I don't have the credentials to question that, but it certainly should be questioned, and we should be deciding whether that is the right standard.
And to your point, let's hope this pandemic is a once-in-a-lifetime experience that
there you go.
Have to deal with. Senator Burgoyne, turning it back over to you. Both Democrats and Republicans in the legislature have voted to give county commissioners authority to override the health districts. Can you speak to this rationale and tell us why it is a bipartisan reform come out of the pandemic?
Thank you for the question. I would say some Democrats have, and I think that there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, I think most of us in the legislature do want to see authorities exercised by elected officials. That's a general preference over unelected officials. It does need to be pointed out, however, that a lot of the health district board members are county commissioners because the commissions appoint their own members in some cases, and one of their members to the commission. And here in this area, the Central District Health District, it has Representative Blanksma, who serves in the Idaho House of Representatives, who's an elected official. I think we're still groping in this area. I wouldn't take too much from the fact that county commissioners are getting some support to take over some of the responsibilities for decision making with respect to health districts. I would just say we're still groping for solutions. I think what we found, the pandemic stress tested everything. And what happens in emergencies, this has been a theme that's going to sound, I think at this point, old to Senator Anthon, because I've talked about it before in our State Affairs Committee. But what happens with these emergency statutes is they get written and then everybody forgets about them for 30 or 40 years. And then there's an emergency, and then we're forced to deal with the fact that our statutes don't suit the situation we find ourselves in. How you reach out over the next 30 or 40 years and put on the shelf the kind of statutes that our children and grandchildren can pick up and use later becomes a very difficult exercise. So it's fair to say the legislature is groping for a solution, and we haven't found it yet. And we're not likely to dot all the I's and cross all the T's for our grandkids. I am heartened by the fact that I feel in the Senate there's a little less of a desire to go back and do what I call score settling to say, well, we didn't like what happened last spring or last summer on this or on that, and so let's go back in time and just make sure everybody understands that we were right and somebody else was wrong. And there's been a little of that. Hopefully we get past the rest of it. And I think the Senate has tried several times to trot out some bills. They've been good in the majority party, I think, about listening to the debate that's given and rethinking some things. I have rethought a lot about these things, and I think we're still struggling and grappling with the issues.
My next question will go towards both of you, but Senator Anthon, we'll turn it back to you. There has been a lot of effort to create a mechanism to let the legislature call itself back into session. What is your take on calling yourselves into session, and will you support the constitutional amendment?
Well, thank you. I don't know that I would support the constitutional amendment. I think we are yet going through a process where we really decide what we're going to put forward for me to vote on. But I would support a constitutional amendment of some sort that would allow the legislature to come back under very limited circumstances and with some very high sideboards, because I am a firm believer in keeping the legislature at home as much as possible instead of in Boise. And I also think the tradition that we've had in the state of Idaho over the years of a part-time legislature is good for Idaho. And I think what you get in the mix of legislators is a better group of people from a wide variety of backgrounds. You don't have professional politicians who are going to do everything they can to keep their job because it's the only job they've got. And there are some negatives to that as well, and I appreciate that. But I'm a firm believer in a part-time legislature. But that having been said, we have known for years there is somewhat of a constitutional hole in the state of Idaho, in that for many years we would go home, and after the legislature would sine die, the governor, whoever it might be at the time, would veto bills. And there was no mechanism for a review by the legislature of those veto bills. We couldn't override a veto simply because of this kind of lacking inside of the Idaho Constitution. Now we've tried to remedy some of that in recent years by just sitting around in Boise waiting to see if the governor will veto, which in my opinion is necessary, but also a waste of the taxpayers' dollars. So there are some limited circumstances where I believe that the legislature should be able to call themselves back. Certainly emergencies are one of those things that I think in terms of setting policy, and if there's major money to be appropriated, that the legislature, because that's their constitutional duty. It's one of their very few constitutional duties, is to appropriate the funds of the state of Idaho. And we saw that through some technicalities in the emergency at hand, the governor was able to spend some of those monies without consideration of the legislature. I don't know that that's really the right way to do it. I don't mean to be critical about how it was done necessarily, but I think there's a better way. And that would include getting the legislature back into session.
The vast majority of state legislatures in the country are able to call themselves back into session. In Idaho, that is not the case, and we can only come back into session if the governor calls us back into session, and the governor gets to set the agenda for the legislature when he does that. I don't think that's appropriate. I think that we should be able to bring ourselves back into session in line with what most states are doing. That having been said, there is only one state in the country right now that limits the reasons that a legislature can call itself into session, and that's Utah, and I think they've got it right. I made a proposal that we essentially could only come back into session for emergencies. And I think if we don't do that, I think especially in election years, there'll be a strong tendency to want to come back into session primarily for the purpose of electioneering rather than legislating. The other thing that I would say is we need to be very careful about how many legislators need to sign on to coming back into session. It is, as one of my constituents said to me, an on-ramp to a full-time legislature. And certainly if we look at the state of Oregon and some other states where they have a lot of special sessions, you begin to feel that way. And I'm with Senator Anthon 100% on the need of the Idaho legislature to be a citizen legislature. I want us to be representative, and we have a problem getting younger people into the legislature in the kind of numbers that I think they ought to be here. And you just want to have a variety of different kinds of people, and they have to be able to make a living, and they have to be able to serve here. And the problem of having professionals is a serious problem that I think if we look around at the experience in other states and in Congress, we see the downsides of having full-time legislators. Now, I'm not saying Congress should be part-time. I get it's a big job, but I don't think we need that for Idaho. I would also say that we need to have, instead of a 60% requirement as in the current legislation, a 2/3 requirement of both houses agreeing to a special session, and that it needs to be limited to emergencies. There's talk out there among folks in the community that with 2 constitutional amendments and other things that are going on about taking away gubernatorial powers over emergencies, et cetera, that this is a legislative power grab. I'm going to say that when it comes to bringing ourselves back into session, I'm on the side of many of my Republican colleagues on that issue. But I think if we do it right, we do it carefully, it's not a grab. A grab is something that's unthinking. We're just reaching out and grabbing. We know that the voters are going to have to rule on these constitutional amendments. They're going to get to go to the polls. They're going to get to vote on them. And on this one, I would say that if we do it right and we do it carefully, the people will see the wisdom of it, and I believe that they will vote for it. But if it is indeed an unthinking process, then I think we run the risk of being perceived, maybe rightfully, as having engaged in a grab.
Senator Anthon, this next question I will turn over to you. The Boise Metro Chamber was involved in the initiative and referendum reforms of the late 90s. The most recent reforms make the initiative extraordinarily difficult and likely exposes it to a lawsuit. What is the rationale for this new restriction on the initiative process? How does the one person, one vote still fit into this?
Okay, thanks, Lindsay. First of all, I can only speak to my own rationale. And I have supported some of these measures. I think I will continue to support these measures, and the current one I do support, and I'll tell you why. I can't justify or stand up for anybody else's rationale. So, and I say that because I want to kind of qualify this. What I hear out in the community as I visit with folks is that the current initiative reform is the product of people who didn't like Medicaid expansion or don't like medical marijuana. And I'm just somebody who doesn't fit into those categories. I supported the Medicaid expansion. I also, under the right circumstances, right language, not any old bill will do, I would support medical marijuana in the state of Idaho as well. So this is not my motive at all. I'm more interested in a couple of things. And in this particular bill, in particular, what I'm interested in is the involvement of all Idahoans in setting the questions that get to the ballot. I think that inclusion is important. I know that people disagree with me. That's fine. As good Senator Burgoyne has heard me say, you know, all I have to do is look to California, and I get nervous about an initiative process which does not allow all Idahoans to participate in the question making. And for example, in Idaho right now, you can't buy an egg unless it's cage free. That's because by initiative, the voters of California outlawed these laying hens in cages. And I can guarantee you one thing, they didn't get the signatures to do that in the rural areas of the state of California. My hunch is that they went into San Francisco's downtown, got a whole bunch of signatures, and then when it came time to vote, those same urban areas approved it. And when it came time to be challenged at the legislature, the Democrat run legislature in California didn't stand up to it. And so what happened was the rural communities, the agricultural industries of the state of California, in my opinion, have been hurt by a process that is not inclusive on the question making. Other than that, I'm a big fan of the initiative process. I think it's a wonderful thing. I support that. I don't mean to do anything that would make it more difficult other than that issue that I just brought up. And that's just one example. I could go through others. On the lawsuit piece, I think that's an important question because policymakers in the state of Idaho shouldn't willy-nilly get the people of Idaho into a lawsuit that costs too much money. And we've done that before. I appreciate that. When I look at this particular issue and this particular bill that we're talking about, I'm not that worried about it. And I'm not worried because in both the 9th Circuit and the 10th Circuit, we've seen cases that are very similar. In Colorado, I think they have an initiative process to get a question on the ballot with regard to changing the Constitution. It requires that every legislative district in that state participate in the question making. And that was challenged in the 10th Circuit, upheld. In the 9th Circuit out of Nevada, they have a little bit different. I recognize it's not exactly on point, but they require all their congressional districts to be included. That was challenged in the 9th Circuit and upheld. So I don't think that it's a certainty that this is in any way illegal. I don't know that it compromises anybody's rights. I recognize it's not going to be popular with those who have certain agendas and want to use the initiative process to get those done easily by going to the urban areas. I get that. But I have styled myself, and I truly try to be, in addition to being a very pro-business voice in the Senate, a pro-agriculture voice. And those are inseparable in Idaho at this point. I think you all recognize that. Our number one industry, our lifeblood, continues to be agriculture. And that's why you are seeing business interests as well as these agricultural interests support a change to the initiative, not because they're trying to take someone's rights away, not because they're upset about Medicaid expansion, not because it's a marijuana issue, although I'm sure it is for some. It's really an important question for us to make sure that we're protecting the industries that have made Idaho great.
That's a good point. I mean, Idaho goes hand in hand with business and agriculture, and we can't avoid that whatsoever. So I'm just going to wrap up with one more question for each of you. Senator Burgoyne, we'll start with you. The state continues to outperform expectations in terms of revenue, and our unemployment is one of the lowest in the country. What needs to be done to keep Idaho at the forefront of the country's shifting economic climate?
Well, Idaho's got to be competitive. Idaho has to have a trained workforce that can command higher wages. We have some good averages that would suggest that Idaho's economy is very strong. I think that those averages kind of mask over some of the weaknesses we have in our economy. We just have a lot of people that are really struggling. That's why Medicaid expansion passed. That's why Medicaid expansion is being used. There are a lot of people in Idaho who have a tough time. And we can have a better economic future, but there are some things we need to do. We need workforce training desperately. We need to get people moving towards certificated training programs and 2-year degrees and 4-year degrees, and being able to make the wages that are needed to pay the higher costs of living and to be able to support their families and not have to rely on the social safety net as much. Pay taxes so that everybody's tax burden can come down. We need investment. Idaho is still a state that struggles to attract capital investment, and we need to get on the map. When I got out of college in 1975, the state of Utah and the state of Idaho were kind of on a par in a lot of ways. Similar populations, although Utah is a little bigger. Similar economies, although Utah had already started to develop some things that Idaho did not. And if you look over the course of my adult life, what I've seen is that Utah has been very engaged on a national and international level with really trying to bring business opportunities to Utahns. And Idaho needs to be very proud of its agricultural heritage, but it also needs to recognize that if we are going to have the kind of economy that we need to have for the future, that the agricultural economy is going to become, as a percentage, a smaller piece of the economic pie. That is not something that goes down easily in rural Idaho. It doesn't go down too easily in the Treasure Valley, where so many people are first-generation urbanites. But we need to accept some realities here. And one of my frustrations in the legislature is that the rural agenda gets a lot of attention from urban Idaho. The rural agenda gets a lot of attention from rural Idaho. The urban agenda doesn't get a very good hearing in rural Idaho, and in many cases, it doesn't get a really good hearing in urban Idaho, and that's a problem.
Well, I'm happy to say that I almost always agree with Grant Burgoyne when it comes to these matters. Listen, business thrives when conditions are stable and predictable. And so from a policy standpoint, what I would suggest to you is the reason why Idaho is doing well and will continue to do well, and where we need to focus, at least generally, on policy is to keep regulations low and predictable, taxes low and predictable, and provide an environment that, as our former governor used to say, the government moves at the speed of business. And I've seen that calculation, that chemistry happen over and over again, and it works. And so I think that's the general answer. On education, we need to continue to focus on education improvements, especially outcomes. Hey, listen, I've voted for every education increase that's come across my desk since I've been in the Senate. But I can't tell you that I am convinced that only money solves the problem. And so what I really try to focus on the other side of that dollar is what are the outcomes. So as we make improvements, we need to continue to work on better outcomes for our students, better career technical education, better training, as the good senator said, for the workforce. And I think we're making some strides there. I actually am not down on Idaho, and I'm not down on Idaho's education system. I think we're making progress. And I think that translates into a good economy, obviously. So the other thing is, I think that Idaho has been very successful in some of our economic development tools, which I would like to protect and maybe improve on their own. But you take, for example, the Idaho tax reimbursement incentive, the TRI. You take urban renewal projects that are properly managed. And I say that because every time I bring up urban renewal, somebody comes with a horror story as to why we got to get rid of it. But that's not the case everywhere. And in fact, in rural Idaho, but for urban renewal, you might never see proper development or economic growth. It's just a fact. And if you don't believe me, come and talk to me. I'll run you through that. But we can stay competitive by offering incentive programs that don't drain the bank, but create incentive for people once they invest in Idaho. And that's the way you do those investment programs, those incentive programs. So I think that we have a good track record. We know what works. We don't have to stray very far from that, but we can fine tune it and make improvements. And I'm happy to say that I think that we do that well in Idaho. I rarely speak where I don't try to take the opportunity to tell those who listen. The Idaho legislature is full of good people. They're full of people who are patriotic. They're full of people who want to do the right thing, and do the right thing not only for their district, but for the state of Idaho. And that is in the minority party and as well as the majority party. And I think our good working relationship reflects that. And that's the future. And that's what I think we need to do to keep Idaho moving in the right direction.
A couple of really good points I like that you said there, Senator Anthon. I know a couple of the legislations that have passed have been crucial for our partners at BVEP and recruiting companies to come to Idaho. Again, just creates a better economic vitality for our entire valley. Just one question for each of you. You kind of started your careers as attorneys and then decided to get into office. What was each of yours inspiration to kind of get into the public elected officials realm, and what keeps you doing what you're doing? Senator Burgoyne, we'll start with you.
Well, I had my political awakening courtesy of my parents when I was about 6 years old. I was very interested in politics and public policy. And I've lived in an interesting time, as many of the rest of us, I'm not unique that way, but there are a lot of issues for us as Americans to address. My father was a military officer. I was not in the military. I always thought that it was important to give back. This was a way I could do that. So there was a little personal interest in doing it. I think one of the things about being a lawyer is you realize how government affects your clients. It has a real impact on real people. And often when they come to see you, it's a negative impact that has occurred. And you want to help them. And you get used to dealing with one branch of government called the courts. And sometimes you sue the government. That's one way to bring about change in government. And another way is to bring it about through the legislature. A lot of the things that are required of legislators are things that lawyers are trained to do and are pretty good at. And when it comes to things like public speaking, which I understand terrifies most human beings, I got over that pretty early in life and practiced law for many years doing public speaking. And so that's not something that would deter me. So there are a lot of different reasons. On a personal level, I have to say at the end of the day that being in the Idaho legislature has restored my faith in a lot of things. The people here, as I agree with Senator Anthon, are good people. The problems that we have tend to be systemic problems with our systems that could use improvement. The people who serve here are generally high caliber people, almost always very high caliber people. I can tell you that there are non-lawyers on the floor of the Senate who can out-debate me, no question about it. Anybody who had a mother or a father who could out-debate them when they were growing up understands what that feels like. It's an exciting place to be. It's every day you're learning things. It keeps you vital. And there are a lot of things in life that can do that for you. Businesses do that for you. My legal practice did that for me. This continues to do. Thank you.
It's a funny thing. During my days at the University of Idaho College of Law, I got married, for one thing. And after I got married, my wife and I observed politics as a newlywed couple. And I don't know what sparked it, but we had this moment as a married couple where we determined we would never get involved in elected politics ever. That was not in our future. That would never happen to us. And what we reasoned was there were so many other good causes, whether it be the 4-H club, the Rotary Club, the local homeless, whatever, the church, whatever it is. And suddenly you find yourself in a different position. And my experience is very similar to Senator Burgoyne's. When I went into full-time practice, my practice was really centered in dealing with, for lack of a better word, distressed family farmers. They were family farmers, large dairies, and other entities who were having financial distress. And that was very rewarding work to make sure that those family farms could get back up on their feet and get going. But what you do realize as you practice law is where the potholes are in the law, where the holes are, where the fixes need to be made. In addition to that, I was the city attorney for a number of cities, including Burley and Rupert and others. And what you spend a lot of time as a city attorney in those small towns doing is drafting ordinances. So I had quite a few years under my belt of drafting local law when a seat opened up in my district. And one of the things that often gets people thinking about it is when the calls come. And that's what happened to me. With that experience now under my belt and with the calls coming and a new talk with the family, we thought it was the right thing for us to do and that the skill set was there. And it was something where as I said before, I could help fill some of those potholes. I could be a strong voice for business. I could be a strong voice for agriculture and serve my community.
Well, Senator Burgoyne and Senator Anthon, thank you so much for your time, your public service. Of course, we always appreciate and taking valuable time out of your day to answer our questions. Once again, thanks to our media partners, the Idaho Statesman, Idaho Ed News, and the Idaho Press for presenting our legislative update. And we will see you all again next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.